Greetings, salutations, and welcome to this review, which is quite different from most of my more recent reviews. This is a review of Red Notice by Bill Browder. We won't mention the cover. As far as I can tell, it's AI generated. This book was nominated by my local in-person book club as the book of the month. And I got it out of the library, as you can see, Gold Coast City Libraries, and read it. I was quite looking forward to it because it's a change of pace. It is non-fiction, written by Bill Browder about Bill Browder's experiences, and it's a chonker. The cover says, "A true story of corruption, murder, and one man's fight for justice." And the back claims that it's part John Grisham-like thriller, part business and political memoir, more like a financial thriller than a real-life story, etc., etc. So I was a bit keen. It was an intimidating 470 pages long, but I'm a fast reader. I'd had no doubt of my ability to get through it. And now is a point at which I'm going to ask you, the viewer, have you heard of Bill Browder? Yes, no? Have you heard of Sergei Magnitsky? I don't speak Russian. I may not be pronouncing that right. And have you heard of the Magnitsky Bill? Stop and think. Don't Google. I had not heard of any of these things. I had no idea who Bill Browder was. I had never heard of Red Notice. Apparently there's YouTubes out the wazoo. There were a lot of news reports, etc., etc. This is apparently big news and has been since, I believe, the mid-2000s. I was oblivious. Now, part of the reason for that is that it is soundly founded in the world of finance, an area that I find less interesting than pond scum. I mean that literally. In pond scum you can find invertebrates. There's a whole microbial life. Biology is my thing. Finance is not. So I went into this book knowing nothing. And I expect that someone going into it knowing something would have a very different experience from the get-go to me. But I'm going to tell you how it worked for me. Poorly. Initially, very poorly. So, because there's a lot, my initial feelings about this book, and we're probably talking about a good first third, maybe half, no, definitely half, the first half, I wasn't enjoying it. I occasionally had to skim read. I made notes. An early one in the first couple of chapters reads, "Is Bill likable? Superficially, but he is essentially a guy who became a businessman to piss off his family of academics, and who didn't see anything wrong in going to a developing country like Poland and basically rorting their system to make a lot of money for himself and other people. And he later went to Russia, again, essentially because he could start a hedge fund, whatever a hedge fund is. It's something to do with finances. Under the name of Hermitage, I think it was, Hermitage Fund, in order to play the Russian system. So when the Russian system was Soviet, then it was communist in a way that later it wasn't. When it decommunized, or whatever, it did a whole heap of things to bring shares to the people at very low cost and very erratic way of doing it. And Bill Browder and his hedge fund Hermitage took advantage of that to get a huge portfolio with a lot of money for his shareholders. And that first third or half of the book was agony for me, because I don't care about finances. If you care about finances or even mildly interested in them, you will probably love this. But I didn't, and for the entirety of this book, I have to say I don't think Browder's skill set is as an author. I think this book is very much testimony to the fact that if you are a person who's had an interesting life and has done interesting things and has got an interesting story, for goodness sake, get a ghostwriter. Get someone who actually writes for a living. Get someone who knows how to deliver that story in a way that people will enjoy reading it. I don't enjoy finances, but there's other things that I have not enjoyed, but I have enjoyed books about them if they are adequately written. And the early part of this book, sorry Bill, and any of your many proponents, the early part of this book is poorly written. Unless you already know who Bill Browder is, you already care about why you should be reading this stuff. I didn't enjoy the first part. I came to totally despise the man who was writing it, on the assumption that he was pretty much a war profiteer, though not in times of war, whose moral ethic basis of the world was, how do I make a lot of money for myself, my investors, and it doesn't matter who gets screwed over in the process. I did not at all respect him or what he was doing. One of my favorite quotes from page 85 at this point was, "This was raw, aggressive capitalism to the core." So essentially, a lot of things that I kind of despise. I don't object to capitalism. I don't object to communism. I largely approve of socialism. But any ism, when taken to the raw, aggressive extreme, is not going to be good for anyone. And in fact, in the end, it wasn't good for Bill Browder either. I would have DNF'd this book long before page 100 if it hadn't been a book club book. I despised it. I had every expectation of giving this a 1-star review and truly racking the bad things about it over the coals, and there's a lot of bad things about it, especially in the writing. The early writing is undeniably clumsy in a lot of ways. So it starts with the protagonist who's flying into Russia, and there's some is he flying out of Russia? He's flying into Russia from London, where his pregnant wife is, and there's problems at the border, and it's all a bit scary. And it's a great beginning. It really sucks us into that whole Russia, danger, corruption, murder, espionage, etc. theme. But then it dials back into the early Bill, how he came to study finance. Like it said, basically he wanted to piss off his family, who were academics, and do something that he knew that they would despise. Lovely guy. But again, having finished all 470 pages, you see a real evolution of character here, and you think back to what you were like when you were young and the things that you did that weren't that great, and maybe you can develop a little bit more respect for Bill Browder, because certainly by the end of the book he's doing a lot of things that one does respect. A lot of very interesting, quite dangerous things that are very worthy of respect. So the level of evolution of character is spectacular. The level of evolution of writing is not. I think the earlier part is clumsier because probably by the time that Browder came to write this book, he no longer particularly liked or respected that earlier himself either. He could probably remember what he did and why he did it, and he was probably being highly transparent in describing his motivations and his actions. But it doesn't come across as nice writing, and I suspect that's because when did he write this? By the time he was writing this, he was basically giving background. He was giving too much background. Okay, this was copyright Hermitage Media Limited, 2015. A conscientious editor, I feel, could have edited the first 200 pages down to maybe 70 or 80 without losing anything by it. Because he's setting up the way he entered into the finance world, this will appeal more to people who like that world. But the skill to make me like it isn't there. And a lot of the character building there is basically name dropping. Name dropping these big hoo-has in the world of finance, and I don't know, and I don't care, and I don't remember them. For example, there's one point where the young Bill goes to Venice. Oh, and I'm actually a bit excited. I've never been to Venice. I thought I might hear about it. No, I didn't hear about Venice. He caught a taxi to a hotel. He got in a gondola. We hear what colour shirt the guy who collected him was wearing. Then he meets a financier that I've never heard of and don't care about, and that's it for Venice. So it is told like a true story because it is a true story being told by the person who told it. Fine. Okay. Oh, chapter 11 I found particularly excruciating. How he wins big with an oil company in Russia, and hindsight, are the ever perfect? I know. But because he's talking about how he sets up his fund in Russia and works from Russia and how it's all going swimmingly and he's making all this money even though Russia's corrupt, and he starts doing all these things, he does insert the fact that he thought that as a foreigner in Russia he would be safe. But I just kept being mesmerized by the fact that someone spent that much time in Russia, clearly knows a bit about the culture, certainly knows about the weirdness of its legal, financial, political systems, its governmental systems that are out of control weird. I know this. I've never been to Russia. I would not expect to necessarily be safe in Russia as a tourist going through, let alone as someone trying to engage in finance there, but he seems to think he is. He wasn't. And so from around page 220, chapter 20 that was, so that's 220 pages into a 467 book. I would never have made it through if it hadn't been a book club. Then we start to get interest. So at this point, the Hermitage Fund in Russia is running into problems. It's clearly being targeted by a number of big business people and a number of political people. A whole heap of weird shit happens. People are in danger. Bill Browder and his Russian wife end up leaving Russia, and over time so do a number of his compatriots. One who doesn't is Sergei Magnitsky. Now, Sergei Magnitsky was a lawyer, and after really bad things start happening in Russia, most of the other lawyers and people leave, but Sergei doesn't. He's a younger person. He has faith in Russia and he has faith in justice. He has not done anything wrong. He refuses to run. His family are there. This does not end well for him. And the story of how all the other people who've been associated with Bill Browder get out of Russia is thoroughly exciting. So from chapter 20, page 220 onward, it is actually a really exciting, really enjoyable book. The things that Russia does to target Browder's company are fascinating, in that I am watching a train wreck type fascination. They are convoluted as you would expect something coming out of Russia to be, and you get to see a lot of the most intricate plots to make bad things happen to Browder, his company, and his friends. Eventually, Sergei ends up being arrested and essentially slowly tortured to death in Russian prisons, and it's well documented. And that was the thing that made this book and the act important, because it was so well documented and so well followed and so well known that various Russian interests' attempts to wipe it under the carpet, pretend it never happened, couldn't work. But it is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear about what happened to that man, and he ends up being beaten to death in a prison cell. Which is not spoilers, because it's on the back of the book, and that hence the fight for justice. Now, following that, Browder becomes essentially a completely different person. He starts fighting for justice for Sergei. He ends up contacting... He had been fighting for some time to get him released with a complete lack of success. But after Sergei had been beaten to death, which some might argue is a bit late, then a whole heap of things started happening. An act to criminalize the people who were involved in his death at all levels of government, police, and prison was passed in America, and it tells a story of how that passed, and various other media institutions and YouTube. Apparently somewhere on YouTube there are all these videos. I've held off on watching them. If you don't think you can manage to read through nearly 500 pages of this book. Go and watch them because I think they'll be fascinating, and I will be watching them now that I've finished the book. So some justice has been brought forward for Sergei, and by doing that has opened their shop for justice to happen to all the many, many other people who are suffering in Russia. Now, Putin does come into this a little bit. He's mentioned in passing in a few ways that aren't necessarily complimentary. And while none of this is really a surprise, I don't think anyone would be surprised at some of the things he's done or some of the things that Russian police have gotten away with. I don't think that this should be surprising to anyone. It was apparently surprising to Browder and his friends, many of whom were Russian, one of whom died because he didn't believe it would happen. So overall, this does indeed end up being a true story of corruption, murder, and one man's death, and it does end up being a political thriller. But it ends up that way. It doesn't start that way from the finish. It's a long slog before you get there. Is it worth slogging through to get there? Yeah, it absolutely is. I would totally recommend this to people with several caveats. And the early chapters are the caveat. I think Browder would have done better for himself, and his friends and editors would have done a better job for him if they'd forced that to be concise. I get that he was trying to set the scene. I get that he was trying to set up who he was and how the fun came to be, but still not great. And so this book, that throughout most of it, I was struggling to imagine myself giving even 1 star out of 5 to, has definitely crept up into the 3-star range, simply for its content and the journey it took me on. Another interesting thing, because I didn't Google anything about this until I'd finished reading the book. One of the first things I Googled, of course, was the author himself, Bill Browder. And I was rather stunned because throughout this, I'd imagined a fairly young man going to Russia. And the dates are in there, and the companies are in there. All the sources are in there. All the information is in there. If you want to fall down a rabbit hole of Googling dates and people and times and events and locations, you can do that. This book will help you. I'd imagined him as a young man. I'd imagined him as a, 30s to 40s man, but he's not. He's actually closer to my age. So this is a very long evolution and a very long experience for him as well. And at the end of the book, 2015, so a few years back, who knows where we all are now, really, he says that he's still fighting for justice, not just for Sergei, but for Russia in general. And he is still approaching European agencies to try and expand the human rights movement in Russia and a whole heap of other really good stuff. So it ended up being quite fascinating. But not an easy read. Not an easy read by any means. So that's my review for Red Notice by Bill Browder. If you like non-fiction, if you're interested in anything Russian, you will probably find this really fascinating. If you're interested in the world of finance, this is the book for you. If you're not interested in the world of finance, but you can cope with it, you may well find a lot in here to enjoy. I honestly can't say that I don't think that you can't go straight up to chapter 19 or read the intro, then leap straight through to chapter 20, 19 or 20. I don't think that will hurt your reading experience at all. Sorry, author, co-authors, people who respect what he's done. And I'm just going to say right here, I really do respect what he's done. By all accounts is phenomenal. And if he's still fighting that fight, I'm impressed. Just not so much by the writing. The story, yes. The writing, not so much. Anyhow, thank you for watching this very ambivalent book, upon which I'm sure many people will have diametrically opposed opinions. I seem to be one of the only people in the book club who have struggled with this much, so I'm guessing I'm the only one who'd never heard of the person or the events. And thank you for watching. Read good books. Read this one perhaps even, because it is essentially a good book. Tricky, but good. Thank you for watching.